When I was asked up here to speak, I said, you know, it's the Easter weekend. As though in Aberdeen it was a different time zone. Could be. And they said yes. And if you had been asked up in this event, so the organisers, I want you to pay heed about this. If you did this event on the Friday, that would have been good. Because I'd have known what to preach on. Because Good Friday is a day filled with such passion. I don't know if any of you got the chance to watch last night the Passion from Manchester. And if anything was brought out in that TV programme, it's the drama, the colour, the excitement, the movement of the passion of Jesus Christ on Good Friday and his death. I could have preached on that. And if you'd had the event on the Sunday, that would have been really, really good. Because then I would have been on to that whole history of the tradition of the Christian church. Easter Sunday, it's hard to go wrong, and some folk manage it. It's hard to go wrong on Easter Sunday. But man, to preach on that day about the resurrection of the dead, when God said yes to everything that Jesus was and Jesus had done, absolutely brilliant. But what about the Saturday? It's Saturday, but Sunday's coming. Doesn't have the same ring to it. However, it's slightly better than it's Saturday and Friday's been. So what about the Saturday in this whole story? When you turn to the Gospels, we read there that Saturday was a period of waiting. It was a Jewish Sabbath. And when we look at the Gospel stories, it seems that on that Saturday, between the Friday and the Sunday, which is normally when it comes, the disciples, you need to keep up. This is Glasgow humour, right? It's faster. Hope I'm parked for a quick getaway. Don't mention the football, don't mention the football. Right. Nothing to mention, is there? In the football, with that we share with... I'm a Clyde supporter, by the way, so it's all right. Wait, okay, in that Saturday, in between the kind of Friday and the Sunday, it would appear that the disciples spent their time waiting, and in their case, waiting once more to grieve the death of their dead hero. So, what is the Saturday about? What are we meant to do in the period of waiting? And actually, that's a really important question for you and I. Because you and I now live, as it were, in the Saturday of history. You and I know that Christ has been crucified. You and I know that Christ is risen, but we wait. We wait for Christ to come again. We are in the waiting. You and I know that Christ is crucified. You and I know that Christ is risen. And those of us who are Christians know that that death and that resurrection has given us new life. And so Peter writes, "Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. In his great mercy, he has given us new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead." We know Christ is dead. We know Christ is risen, but we wait. We wait for that day that Peter describes in here as the day of the coming of the salvation that is ready to be revealed in the last time. You and I are in the waiting. Christ has been crucified. Christ is risen. And we wait for Christ will come again. When I first became a Christian, it was many years ago, and in those days I thought you had to play the guitar to be a Christian, because everybody did. There were actually no worship songs that you could play, as it turned out, but it was good to be able to play the guitar. And so it was the day of the gospel rock band. Not the worship band, the gospel rock band. And because it was Christians, you didn't have to be able to play the guitar well. G, D, and A would do. And as you saw this evening, G, D, and A clearly still will do. But nevertheless... And I was in one of these bands, and I played the bass guitar, and I couldn't tell you today what the four strings of a bass guitar are, right? That's how bad it was. But there was a band who were kicking around at the time when I was new, fresh to the faith, had been birthed into this new resurrection hope thing that Jesus gives to you when you begin to follow him. And it was new to me, and I was living it. And the band were called His Message. Some of the old-timers may have heard them if you were ever down central Scotland, right? And then they called themselves Message. And We're creative in the Christian church, if nothing else, right? And they used to do this song, and I remember it always made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end whenever they sang it. They were singing it about the return of Jesus Christ, and it was for a song that came from the States called Grand Arrival. And I just remember them saying, we're getting ready for the grand arrival. Who can imagine what that day will be like? I tell you, people, it will be way out of sight, because we're living in the light. We're living in the light. We're living in the light of his coming. And in the letter of 1 Peter, Peter is concerned that as we live in the Saturday of history, that as we wait for the Christ who has been crucified and the Christ who is risen, as we wait for this Christ to come again, Peter is concerned that we would live our lives in the waiting in a way that will ensure that when he returns, as he describes it, our lives will be to his praise and to his honor and to his glory. He longs that we will live in the light of his coming. And through the letters of Peter, what he tries to do is he tries to explain to people, this is what it means to wait for Christ to come again. And through the letters he says a lot of things, but in the verses we read, he's got some big ideas. Let me just mention some of the big ideas. What it means to live waiting for Christ to come again. One of the big words he picks up is the word hope. You've heard me read it once or twice. Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. In his great mercy, he has given us new birth into a living hope. The other day I was in the car with my daughter, and I thought I would try out part of my talk for tonight on her. It's payback. I have to run her everywhere, right? So she may as well put up with some of this. And I said to her, I said, dear, do you know that the resurrection of Jesus was a proleptic disclosure in history of the end of time? My daughter's 14, right? And when you're 14, you don't need to speak. Especially if you're a 14-year-old girl. Girls, you have power, right? You just need to look. And there's nothing so withering or devastating as the look that girls can give you when they're age kind of 14 and 15, right? They reduce your brilliance to whimpering embarrassment. And you should be glad, because she did. And so I've taken that line out altogether. But instead, let me say this to you. The resurrection in history is the sign and the promise that at the end of history, when God's kingdom fully comes, all will be well. All things will be well. The resurrection in history is the sign and the promise that at the end of history, when God's kingdom fully comes, the powers of death, destruction, violence, and evil shall not have the last word. The resurrection in history is the sign and the promise that at the end of history, when God's kingdom fully comes, God will do something so new that it's never been in our experience and not even in our imagination. The resurrection in history is the basis of our hope. That Christ has died, Christ is risen, and yet Christ will come again. And Peter wants us not simply to have that hope, but to live in that hope. It's a living hope. Hope isn't a kind of holding pattern until eternity comes. It's a motivating principle as to how we should live our lives. I've just finished reading a book about Donald Soper. Some of you will know who Donald Soper was. Donald Soper was a Methodist leader. He went on to be, I think, a Labour Lord in the House of Lords. And not everyone liked Soper, what he said or what he did. But even the folk who didn't really appreciate what he did had to admire his courage and his perseverance and his determination. Do you know that for 60 years, on Wednesday afternoons, he would go to Tower Hill Park in London and preach in the open air. He also preached in Hyde Park on Sunday afternoons at a kind of speaker's corner. And here he would preach on a whole range of issues. And this is what upset some folks. Some of it was political, some of it was social, some of it was religious. But as far as Soper was concerned, essentially he was always preaching Christ and his kingdom and what that meant in the world. And he kept this up. Year after year after year, right up until he was 90, and they basically had to help him up onto the soapbox that he would speak from. Soper, in his life and work,